And welcome, everybody, to an amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We got a show for you. First, let me apologize. Missed the last 2 days. Super busy. In fact, I'm even recording this not in my office, but as I'm out and about, kind of getting some things done. Busy time for me, so I apologize for not getting out a show the last 2 days. A few of you reached out to me asking if I was okay or going to do a shows again, and of course, I will keep delivering that all important information. And today we're going to cover, I've got some thoughts on not the debate itself. I'm sure many of you, especially if you follow any other podcast, listen to any other podcast, have heard them beat that debate to death and talk all about it like crazy. And so I don't think it's actually worthwhile for us to have a discussion on the debate itself. But there's this really interesting article I read after the debate from Washington Post called "Who Won the Harris-Trump Debate? We Asked Swing State Voters." And so I want to go into that article because some of the responses would explain, I think, a lot of what we're going to see going on after the debate, which is Trump will actually probably continue to do better despite, generally speaking, the punditry out there saying Harris overperformed, Trump underperformed. Of course, we know that Trump was, not debating Harris, but debating ABC moderators, putting that in quotations, and Harris happened to be there. But besides that, there's these statements from some of these swing state voters kind of tell us a lot about what's going on. So we'll go into that article. And then also, as well, I asked a question on Twitter. I'm really confused about it, called gender affirming haircuts. Apparently in Louisville, they're doing some sort of LGBTQ youth event, and they're doing gender affirming haircuts, which is very confusing to me. I'll go into why that's so confusing. So we'll have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. First, of course, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Make sure you tell others to tune into the show. The more people that listen, the more responsibility I feel to make sure I get out a show. In fact, I wasn't going to do a show today. I was so busy, and then I saw how many people had tuned into the last episodes and some of the people asking me if I was going to do another show, and that encouraged me to go ahead and at least crank out something today. So please make sure you are sharing it with others. But without further ado, let's get into it. So as I alluded to at the beginning, I don't want to talk about the debate itself, but the aftermath, and specifically this Washington Post article called "Who Won the Harris-Trump Debate? We Asked Swing State Voters." Now, at the top of this article, they lay out who their people they talked to think performed better. 23 people said Harris performed better. 2 people said Trump performed better. But the problem here, and it starts right away for Harris, is the first comment. So this is from Aaron in Pennsylvania, who said that Harris performed better than Trump. And right off the bat, this is what Aaron had to say. He says, "I don't think Trump was at his best, too rambly. He would have been better had he stayed calm and made more of the intentional effort to answer the question. Harris made a strong showing. It's not clear that her words actually stand up to scrutiny, but she sounded confident and seemed to make sharp and effective attacks against Trump." And there's a few people in here that had a preference for Harris, and this is really important. This is from Melissa in Nevada, a woman in her 40s. She appears to be white, and going into the debate, she had a preference for Harris, and she says Harris performed better in the debate. So this was a voter who already was precluded to voting for Harris, obviously is looking for a reason to reaffirm it. And she said Harris did better than Trump in the debate. But listen to her statement. She says, "Overall, I felt frustrated with tonight's debate. We can do so much better. As a country, we deserve better from our leaders and from the discussions that shape our future. I appreciate Trump has strong views and trust his ability to make strong, decisive choices. I worry that Harris may lack clear convictions or follow through." Now, that is somebody who had a preference for Harris, says Harris performed better in the debate, but listen to that statement. That certainly doesn't sound like somebody in that statement that going into the voting booth is actually going to pull that letter for pull the lever, for Harris. And it kind of goes on like this. So they showed kind of a pre-debate and post-debate, and they said pre-debate, nobody was definitely Harris. 12 were probably Harris. 3 were neither. And 10 were probably Trump. Post-debate, 5 people definitely Harris. 10 people probably Harris. So Harris picked up 3. Neither was 3. And then probably Trump was 6. So probably Trump actually lost 4. And he didn't gain any definitely Trumps post-debate. But then you go back into the statements here about where people fall. And when it comes to which candidate would better handle health care, well, of course, 16 people said they preferred Harris. 8 people said Trump. But listen to the statement that Washington Post made. This is what they wanted them to respond to. They said, Trump said that his administration would look at alternatives to the Affordable Care Act, but provided no specifics. I have concepts of a plan, Trump said. Harris said as vice president, they've strengthened the ACA and for the first time allowed Medicare to negotiate drug prices. And so that is part of the problem with Trump, obviously, was when he said he had concepts of a plan that didn't look good. But listen to this. Do you agree with Harris's statement on what kind of president America wants? Harris said, regardless of people's color or language or grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division. Disagree strongly? Nobody. Disagree somewhat? 1 person. Agree somewhat? 4. Agree strongly? 17. But this is what's funny, okay? So a person who agrees strongly with Kamala Harris's statement saying about what she believes we want out of a president for America. This is Alan, who's under 30, white guy in Arizona, says he agreed strongly with Harris's statement, but here's his comment, was this. What she says is what I hope the future of America is, but it sounds a lot like politics talk. I don't know I can trust her. Going into a few of these other comments, here's another comment made by Jared, spelled with a Y, out of Georgia. Says that's Jared, J-A-R-Y-D. Interesting way to spell Jared. Here's a comment he made. He said, it's pretty much what I expected. Trump can't stay on message, and Harris is giving scripted responses instead of answering moderator questions. Here's a telling one too. Here it says, Trump said we have a nation that is dying. Do you agree? 4 people strongly disagree. 6 people disagree somewhat. 3 people neither agree nor disagree. 5 people agree somewhat. 6 people agree strongly. But listen, once again, let's go into what the actual response is, because you'd say that, okay, so people who believe America is dying are going to fall more towards Trump because he's the one messaging kind of on that. And you'd say those who disagree probably would fall towards Harris. This is an Aaron out of Pennsylvania, says he disagrees somewhat, and this was his statement. It says, it's hard to tell from my vantage point whether America is declining on a grand scale or not. I suspect overall it's not, but there are likely many areas where America has gotten weaker. Here's another one that says, I agree somewhat. Our economy is dying and the American dream for the next generation seems extremely bleak. Another person, I think the economy is in decline as well as our border safety. Here's someone who agrees strongly. I'm 21 years old. And yet, so much has changed. For example, my family's financial situation improved. However, it was easier for my parents to purchase a home when they earned only 20% of their current salary. I think we're headed to where it's hard to live the supposed American dream. So I agree with that statement. Another person that agrees somewhat. We need substance from both candidates, and we're not getting it. Both are not giving evidence of truly fixing the economy. Another interesting question, and I'm bringing these up because I want you to hear the responses, because this is people who on the survey, when just asked the question, responded in a way that would make it seem like they would support Harris for president. But when you get into their responses, it doesn't seem like they would support Harris. And they're calling Harris out directly calling it out. Here's a good one here. Who made better arguments on abortion access? Harris, 16, Trump, 9. And what's interesting here is a person, 50s, out of PA, says, I don't like the fact this is a discussion, but Trump explained better what to expect from him. I'm pro-choice, but I do agree with limits. That's incredibly telling. And that's a person who says they're pro-choice, but they think Trump answered the abortion argument better. Isn't that fact? Because when you're looking at swing state moderate voters, I'm just going to tell you right now, swing state moderate voters are going to have a feeling of we don't want either extreme when it comes to abortion. And that is, and I believe, I think I heard Vivek Ramaswamy mention this, and I think it's so true, that Trump's handling of the abortion question, while I may disagree with the statements at hand, and we can go into the politics of abortion or not here, and I've done it many times on the show, I just don't have time to do it today, but when he went into his answer of saying, look, this is tearing people apart, this is arguments ridiculous, and then he turns to Harris and says, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, do you believe in abortion at those limits? And Harris didn't answer the question. That is an understated moment where it made, for once, the Democrat was looked extreme on abortion as they are. And the people who are responding to this are saying, yeah, that did make a sense from me. That did make sense how he argued that about extreme views on either way. Here's another one. While I appreciate that Trump says he doesn't support a nationwide ban and believes it's not up to him, I found Harris to be stronger overall. So she's saying, yeah, sure, Harris is more pro-life, but they're even acknowledging that when they're saying Trump would sign an abortion ban, it is obviously not true, and that's important too as well. Here's an interesting one. Who made better arguments about how to handle the economy? This one's interesting because in poll after poll after poll, it shows the thing that people are most worried about is the economy. And 11 people say Harris, 12 people say Trump. But the question becomes, when you start looking at people's responses, for Harris, you have a pretty vapid response, but for Trump, they had 3 people respond with affirmatives for Trump, talking about how Harris wasn't very clear. For an example, this is Tamara 30s out of Michigan. This should be a pretty prime Harris voter. The pandemic and unemployment jab was a bit of a low blow. Harris is saying why Trump's plan won't work, and who says why, but does not explain why hers will work. She just says it will. How can we trust either of them? Well, the question can be answered because you've lived through Trump economy and you've lived through Biden-Harris economy. Which one were you doing better in? And this voter even recognizes that bringing about the pandemic is a low blow, and that's not fair, straightforward, or honest. Now let's go into who are you most interested in watching. This was asked before the debate. Interesting, see here. So Benjamin out of PA, I'm looking to see if Harris can establish her policy platforms and avoid falling for any of Trump's provocations. I already have a general idea of where both candidates stand. Here's another person, Edwin, under 30 in Georgia. I already have a general idea of where both candidates stand in terms of values and policies, but I haven't seen any formal interaction between the two top candidates. And that interaction along with the responses are both things I'm looking forward to. Here's Jared in Arizona. The novelty of seeing Harris in an unscripted situation. But remember what the responses were, is that people were recognizing that she was giving scripted responses. Here's another one out of Michigan, another swing voter out of Michigan. Is Harris going to actually explain how her policies will be realized and made to be realistic and formulate an actual policy? Is Donald Trump going to be able to focus on the questions and answer them to the extent the public expects, or will he get pulled into a back and forth arguing that gives us nothing? And so they went through and covered some of these people. And I'm telling you, a lot of the people that I read in here, they were leaning Harris. You heard those responses. And what they were giving didn't sound like they were very convicted for Harris. In fact, it looks like they recognized almost all of it. And so you wonder, why are they saying Harris? Why are they saying they're leaning Harris more? But when you go into their actual responses, it doesn't sound like they're that convicted. And this goes into the same reason I believe that we've seen national polling and polling in general completely underestimate Trump often. often by several points. We've seen in 2016. We actually saw it in 2022 as well. And we'll probably see it again this year. That's why the fact that Trump is even within spitting distance and in some polls ahead in the national popular vote is a big problem for Kamala Harris. And that is because Trump voters don't like to say that they're going to vote for Trump. Even these people who those statements you say, okay, that's the person who's going to vote for Trump, are saying that, I'm leaning Harris. And I think a lot of this has to do with something called push polling. And I think this has been kind of like built into people due to what's called these push polls. And maybe you've never received a push poll. And that might be because you're not especially if you live in Kentucky and you're not in any kind of a district that is a competitive district for big money races like Congress, like Senate, obviously in governor, you maybe should have received a few of them. And you have to be a high propensity voter too as well, and they have to be able to have your number on file. But push polls are something that happens in campaigns. It can happen digitally too as well, where it seems like a traditional poll, but when you answer Trump or you answer Harris, depending on who's pushing the push poll. So like for an example, if it's a Trump push poll, then you would, if you answered Harris, they would then come back after you've answered Harris with questions like, did you know that Harris was called the most liberal and blah, 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 blah. Or they'd respond with, did you know that Harris supported ending privatized Medicare? Did you know, medical insurance? Did you know that Harris was, father was a communist instructor? Did you know that Kamala Harris, let thousands of members out onto the street as a prosecutor? It's a campaigning method of asking people who they want to vote for. And if they say Harris, they now are able to pose these questions. What's crazy is they can pose these questions even in such a way where they can lie. For an example, they can say something like, and this actually happened to me in my state Senate race. There was a push poll going out in the primary for the other candidate. And this was before that other candidate had even, or before NRA had came out with their endorsements. And so in the push poll, it says, will you vote for, in this case is Donald Douglas or Andrew Cooperrider? And if you selected Andrew Cooperrider, one of the responses you'd get would be, does it change your mind about voting for Andrew Cooperrider if you knew that Donald Douglas was endorsed by the NRA? Response like that. At that point, Douglas wasn't endorsed by the NRA. But you could say, does it change your vote if Donald Douglas is endorsed by the NRA? Because you never said that he was endorsed by the NRA. You're just asking if he was. Would that change your vote? So it gives you the ability to get away with lying too as well. And I think that push polling has really pushed a lot of people to not be honest with pollsters because they have no idea if they're getting a real honest poll that's trying to get a real honest opinion or if they're getting something called a push poll in order to campaign to them. And they don't feel like getting into a discussion with somebody about why they're voting for Trump. And so they might sheepishly say, I think I'm leaning Harris. And then if it ends up being a push poll for Trump, they can be like, yeah, never mind, I'm going to vote for Trump. And this might be why, going into it, the internals, and you hear Trump talking about, we're up in the polls a lot. He could be looking at his internal polling. And his internal polling could even look a lot different than Harris's internal polling. Because this flip-flop from Harris over to Trump could be really high with their push polls. And so I think that's important to mention because you might even see in the polling, Trump not falling but actually going up. And you might be very surprised on Election Day how it happens. And everyone's going to faint shockness maybe again or say, how'd the polls get it so wrong? But just simply looking at that Washington Post article and looking at the story there, it tells me how they got it wrong. So here's turning now from national politics to something more local. And I'd posted about this on my social medias about a interesting event going on. So there is some sort of queer kids, a charity event for queer kids in Louisville happening on the 22nd. And I saw a barber make a post where he was looking for volunteers to help him do, I'm assuming him, gender-affirming haircuts. Partnered up with Louisville Youth Group, DM for Deets, Pick for Tax. I don't know what that is. But anyways, gender-affirming haircuts. for queer kids. And that leads me to a lot of questions. This is questions I asked about online, and people, they didn't respond. Of course, they call me bigoted and stupid or whatever. But I did have a real question here about what is a gender-affirming haircut, because I've been informed that it doesn't matter how you do your hair. It doesn't matter even how you necessarily dress. It doesn't matter whether you have facial hair or not. You could call yourself a woman or call yourself a man, and regardless of where you fall, you are now that gender. I've been told that men can wear their hair long. They can even wear them in buns. In fact, they have a name for it called man buns. They can wear their hair in ponytails. Women can wear their hair short. They can and exit the more traditional gendered haircuts without it not representing or changing their gender. But what the assertion here is that somehow a haircut defines your gender, that somehow this cutting going on will make you feel like you're more in your own skin somehow. And I think this goes into just really in the LGBTQ, especially the quote-unquote queer community, this idea of like, oh man, we have to find a new thing. I've got to find a way to quote-unquote contribute to the group. It's kind of like, there's not really a lot of fights left. Obviously, when it comes to transing the kids,